The day fades slowly beyond the treetops, and the sky turns a soft, bruised lavender as dusk lays its quiet hand over the forest. A winding path, once marked by horse-cart wheels, is now softened by fallen pine needles and the slow hush of moss beneath bare feet. Along its edge stands a small hut, crooked but warm, with smoke curling gently from a stone chimney and herbs strung like faded flags above the wooden door. Inside, the light of the hearth flickers golden against the old timber walls, and the scent of lavender, elderflower, and peat rise with the warmth. The healer moves slowly, her hands familiar with the ritual of care. She sets down her satchel of dried yarrow, shakes rain from her cloak, and stirs the pot hanging above the fire. The broth simmers gently, carrying the earth-rich aroma of root vegetables and wild garlic gathered at dawn when the leaves were still laced with dew. The hut is small but full of quiet life. Bundles of dried rosemary and rue line the ceiling beams. A well-worn mortar and pestle sit beside folded linens and beeswax candles. A cat curled on a woolen rug breathes in rhythm with the slow crackling of the firewood. Outside, the last birds call to one another from the trees, and the forest begins to settle into sleep. The healer places a carved wooden bowl near the hearth, its steam rising like the last breath of day. She reaches for her journal, its spine soft from years of notes and memories, and writes one more line beneath today's weather. As the fire settles into a quiet orange glow, she leans back into the silence, letting the hush of evening fold gently over her, like a woolen blanket long warmed by time. Mist clings to the window panes, blurring the shapes of distant trees that sway slowly in the wind. A faint drizzle has settled over the hills, casting everything in a soft silver hush. Inside the healer's hut, the world feels tucked away, a small sacred shelter from the dampness beyond the door. The fire burns low, its glow spilling across uneven floorboards and dancing softly on shelves crowded with apothecary jars and linen-bound books. The healer, a quiet woman of many winters, moves gently across the room, her footsteps muffled by sheepskin rugs. She picks up a bundle of dried valerian and ties it with a green thread, then places it into a satchel beside cloves and willow bark. Her fingers are nimble, weathered, and kind. Each gesture speaks of patience, of many seasons past gathering and preparing, offering relief with roots and rest. Never hurry. On the table, a ceramic teapot steams beside a cup painted with tiny faded violets. She pours slowly, the liquid a deep amber, its scent both floral and grounding. Chamomile, linden blossom, a hint of lemon balm. With both hands around the cup, she sits on a low wooden bench and watches the flames curl upward, softening the air with their slow rhythm. Outside, a squirrel scampers beneath a dripping branch. Somewhere further, a bell tolls faintly from a monastery beyond the woods. But here, time holds no edge. The healer turns her face toward the warmth, listening to the fire's breath, remembering the first time she lit this hearth, years ago, when the forest felt vast and unfamiliar. Now it feels like an old friend. The walls hum with memory, and the night has no rush. The rain continues to fall, gentle, even, a lullaby for leaves and moss and those who sit quietly beside a fire, with stories yet unwritten, resting quietly in their hearts. The forest was beginning to sigh into evening, its branches whispering with the weight of dusk. Along a narrow creek, soft with reeds and stepping stones, a light glows faintly through the trees, steady, golden, and low to the ground. It comes from the healer's hut, nestled beside an elder tree whose trunk is twisted with age and thick with moss. Inside, the hearth has just been stoked with new wood, and the scent of resin rises into the rafters. A pot simmers slowly, filled with lentils, chopped onion, and dried thyme gathered in the late summer sun. The room is dim but cozy, lit only by the hearth's glow and a small beeswax candle near the cot. The windows rattle softly in the wind, but the walls, built of hand-laid stone and clay, hold firm against the chill. The healer sits on a cushion woven from flax, darning a woolen sock by the firelight. Her movements are slow, not from age, but from intention. Everything here is touched by care. The wooden ladle, the woolen shawl, the leaf-shaped spoon carved from alder. Each item tells of a life lived in tune with the land. Hanging herbs sway slightly with each movement of the air. Sage, marjoram, rose hips, and a small woven charm, shaped like a star, dangles near the chimney, a gift from a village child once healed of fever. There is no noise but the soft bubbling of the stew and the quiet hum of the healer's own breathing. Outside, the sky deepens to indigo. A fox passes silently beneath the window. The evening folds itself around the hut like a blanket, and the world outside becomes a distant murmur. In the hush that follows, the fire crackles once more, and the healer smiles gently to herself, as though remembering a dream not yet ended.
The wind hums gently through the tall pines, their tops swaying in slow agreement with the turning of evening. Beyond a curve in the wooded trail, where ferns crowd low and frogs nestle in the damp soil, stands a hut with smoke curling from its chimney like a ribbon drifting toward the moon. It is the kind of place you might pass without noticing, unless you were listening for peace. Inside, the healer is pressing petals between parchment pages, her hands stained faintly with rose and marigold. She places each flower with the care one gives to memory, gentle, attentive, loving. The hearth murmurs nearby, warming the small room filled with soft, familiar clutter. A basket of worn cloths, a carved box of glass vials, a broom made from bundled birch twigs. The air smells of dried mint, beeswax, and rain-damp wood. A kettle hangs above the flames, filled with a warm tonic of fennel and honey root. It will be poured into clay mugs at nightfall, its sweetness lulling tired limbs into sleep. The healer hums softly, the sound blending with the fire, with the rustle of leaves outside. A feather dangles from a nail above the door, gray, long, perhaps from a heron, swaying slightly whenever the breeze slips through the window cracks. As the evening settles deeper, she tidies the shelf of folded linens, runs her fingers across the edge of a small mirror made from polished tin, then sits at the hearth with a worn book in her lap. She doesn't open it. She simply rests her hand on the cover, feeling the comfort of its weight. The fire glows steady. The world grows still. Outside, a single owl calls across the trees. The hut, warm and hushed, waits patiently with her for sleep to find its way in. A soft layer of snow dusts the forest floor, muffling every sound until the world seems to breathe in silence. The healer's hut sits like a memory at the edge of the trees, its roof dressed in white, its door half covered by the gentle drift. A faint flicker from the hearth inside glows through the small window, inviting the cold to pause just short of the threshold. Within, the warmth feels like a soft embrace. The hearth burns low, its coals red and steady, casting a gentle light across the woven baskets and fur-lined slippers near the bed. A gentle hush cradles the room. The healer, wrapped in a thick woolen shawl, sits at the low table by the fire, slowly grinding dried juniper berries with a stone pestle. The scent is woody, clean, ancient. Steam rises from a cup of nettle tea, resting on a folded linen. Beside it, a journal lies open, the day's notes already written, ink drying in soft loops and curves. Outside, snow taps lightly at the shutters, a sound so faint it feels imagined. The cat stretches in the corner, tail flicking in its sleep. She adds a pinch of the powdered berry to a small jar, corks it with practiced ease, and places it on a narrow shelf lined with tinctures and salves. Each label is handwritten, smudged slightly from years of touch. These small acts, the grinding, the labeling, the tea, are sacred in their simplicity. As night deepens, the shadows lengthen across the stone floor. The healer moves to her rocking chair, the wood creaking softly beneath her. She draws her shawl tighter and gazes into the heart of the fire. Nothing needs to be said. The evening has arrived in full, and in its quiet, there is everything.
Sunset filters through the high branches and warm streaks of gold and honey, catching the edges of leaves and lighting up dust motes that float lazily in the still air. The healer's hut rests at the forest's edge, its small windows catching the last light of the day. A soft breeze nudges open the curtain, letting in the scent of wild rosemary and distant wood smoke. Inside, the fire has been built high for the cool night ahead, and it crackles gently, its glow painting the stone walls with dancing amber shapes. The healer tends to her bundles of dried plants, untying them one by one, shaking loose the leaves, and placing each into small clay bowls for sorting. Her motions are slow and rhythmical, a kind of unspoken prayer for rest and renewal. The wooden floor is warm beneath her bare feet. She moves from table to shelf with quiet ease, pausing now and then to sip from a mug of warm spiced cider. It fills the room with notes of clove and apple, grounding the body and calming the mind. On the windowsill, a simple woven doll sits next to a bundle of cinnamon sticks, watching the day fall away. She draws a woolen curtain across the door and settles beside the hearth, her body wrapped in a long cloak the color of tree bark. There, she begins to mend a small linen pouch, stitching its seam with fine, careful thread. Outside, the forest begins its nightly symphony, the rustle of wind, the chirp of unseen birds, the distant call of a fox. She listens without needing to speak. The fire glows, the night unfolds like a lullaby, and within the quiet rhythm of her hands and breath, the healer slips into the kind of silence that welcomes dreams.